Kenyans are heading to the presidential polls come the 9th of August. That's next Tuesday, with the front runners being Deputy President William Ruto and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga. A report by Global Civil Society Alliance, that's CIVICUS, and the Kenyan Human Rights Commission has found that excessive force has been used against protesters in the lead-up to this election. The report details how laws are being abused in order to undermine peaceful demonstrations. It's also being alleged that journalists are facing intimidation from politicians. For more details contained in this report, let's speak to East Africa researcher at CIVICUS, that's Sylvia Mbataru, who joins us via our video link from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. It's lovely to have you on the program, Sylvia. Thanks very much indeed for making time. You know, it's such a pity because often we speak about several nations on the African continent facing, let's call it, a suffocation of the democratic space in the lead-up to an election. Is that how you describe the situation in Kenya?
Thank you for having me. So I would say the Kenyan, to be honest, civic space or environment that is has been on a steady decline for the last couple of years, and this steady decline continued in the last year. So we have a research report which documents this decline in the last year, and what we are seeing is exactly as you put it. We are seeing protesters in the entire of the year being repressed. We are seeing journalists being at risk as well. And so this year has not been different. It's been a year where the civic space continues to be under attack.
Yeah, as you say, there is some kind of reputation. Apologies if I interrupted you there. But, you know, for instance, Kenyan police are known to be quite overhanded in their treatment of even demonstrators in any other time. Would you say the situation, insofar as that is concerned, is worsening in the lead-up to this election?
I would say it's a situation that has been as is. It has been as is. So what we've been doing at CIVICUS is to document the behavior of the police and the authorities. And in as far as protests are concerned, this behavior has been declining on a steady slope. And so even in the lead-up of the election, what we were seeing in 2017 in the previous election is exactly what we are seeing now. Protesters continuing to be disrupted by the police. The heavy-handedness is still there as has been in the last couple of years.
I wonder what, the response from ordinary civilians to this might be. We get a sense, for instance, that there's growing frustration and that might come with some kind of retaliation. How would you describe how ordinary people who, without a doubt, are noting these things are finally responding to it?
So what has been happening is because of the high-handedness of the police, we are becoming, or we are seeing citizens engaging in other methods of protest. So, for example, we see a lot of campaigns going online, for instance. So we have like a campaign where called the Njaa Revolution, which basically translates to the Hunger Revolution. It's a translation from Swahili, where people have been campaigning for the government to reduce the prices of food and basic commodities due to the high inflation that has been seen this year especially. So we see such campaigns beginning to go online. And this is because a lot of times physical protests are met with so much high-handedness that protesters are now beginning to find other ways to be able to campaign and to express themselves. And online, one of the mechanisms has actually been to go online. Also on Twitter, you'll see such campaigns getting a lot of traction through Twitter and through other mechanisms. Yeah.
Does that frustration typically translate into voter turnout?
Voter turnout, I wouldn't speak to voter turnout at the moment because it seems quite unclear yet how the turnout will be. To be honest, this is a year where I think the elections will be extremely, so far we are unable to extremely say how it will be, but voter turnout definitely this year will be something to look out for. But it's very unclear how it will be, but it will be a key determining factor this year, especially for the youth.
Let's speak also about the environment for journalists. I mean, the kind of intimidation that we've heard of also comes from politicians, the kind of people who you'd actually want to speak to at a time of heightened political wrangling, as it were. What's the experience for reporters who are trying to cover the story in Kenya?
So we've seen situations where journalists covering, for example, campaign rallies are being attacked. One of the cases was some journalists getting attacked during a campaign by one of the candidates, Raila Odinga, in March of this year. And we've seen also during the entire of last year, as the campaigns began, we documented quite a couple of situations where journalists covering rallies or covering meetings are actually being attacked. So the situation of journalists tends to be quite risky, especially now as we enter into election years. This is something, again, we documented in the previous election cycle, that is 2017, where we saw journalists getting caught up in the entire political tensions situation of the country. So journalists, for them, this tends to be a time where they get into a lot of risk as they do their work. But definitely we have documented situations where journalists are getting attacked, especially in the rallies and in the campaigns, just because they're going there to report and document what's happening. Yeah.
Obviously concerning for the free dissemination of information. The Kenyan Human Rights Commission has also flagged some of these issues of matters of concern. I wonder what the institution's standing in society there might be like. In other words, does what the commission say actually land and lead to some kind of change?
Unfortunately, we haven't seen an immediate expression of concern from authorities with regards especially to the attacks on journalists, especially and also from government. We haven't seen a condemnation, for instance, of public condemnation of these acts against journalists. And over the last, I would say over the last year or two, again, CIVICUS has been documenting a continuous deterioration of the situation for journalists in the country. So, for example, even before the run-up to elections, we would already be documenting a lot of attacks on journalists, a lot of intimidation on journalists, especially those covering issues of corruption, and issues of land matters that tend to be very emotive in the country. So now as the elections come, we find that these already existing tensions become even worse for journalists. But we are yet to see the government expressly coming out and saying, condemning these acts. And now as the elections begin to, the campaigns begin, this becomes even worse, and we don't see any express condemnation from authorities at all.
Really concerning in a context where we're just days away from this important poll. For now, Sylvia, thanks very much indeed for helping us understand better the conditions there in Kenya in the lead up to this election. Let me say this, the world is watching, and hopefully that means something about the situation changing. Sylvia Mbataru is a researcher with CIVICUS, left us there from Nairobi. Thanks very much indeed.